Hello, my name's Julia Gallagher and I'm the PI on the project African State Architecture here at SOAS, University of London. IB, Innocent. It's really congratulations on your article, which has just been published in the Journal of Southern African Studies. I should say that the article is called Who's Building? Tracing the Politics of the Chinese Government-Funded Parliament Building in Lesotho. It's a fascinating article, and today I want to ask you a few questions about it and find out a bit more about the story behind the article, as well as what you wrote about.
Thank you so much.
Perhaps you could tell me a little bit about what was the puzzle behind the article, behind the research that led to the article.
This article is coming from a larger project as part of my doctoral research, working on Chinese government-funded parliament buildings in Africa. And so the bit that was quite confounding for me was, China is getting into African countries, donating parliament buildings, for giving them out for free. China, a single party, authoritarian regime, getting into African countries and trying to support multi-party liberal democratic leaning parliaments. But the second bit that I found puzzling was, why would the African states themselves, the beneficiary states, accept as gifts such important buildings? For Lesotho in particular, I was directly interested in that. Here is a country that is not really a major player in African politics. And also China, the relationship between China and Lesotho was not really the one that is established. So I was quite intrigued to find out why China would be interested to invest in a parliament building in Lesotho, which economically is not one of the big hitters in Africa.
Perhaps you could tell me a little bit about some of the background as to why Lesotho needed a new parliament and why this building was important and necessary in the first place.
The idea of a new parliament in Lesotho, it goes way back in the 1960s when the founding prime minister, or actually the second prime minister, Ntate Jonathan, spoke about this idea of coming up with a new parliament, but that at the end of the day, that didn't come to fruition. But later on in the 2000s, and this was now the era of what was called in the African parliaments, the reforming of parliaments. So there are a number of countries in the West which were supporting the transformation of African parliaments, introducing portfolio committees, expanding their remit. So as that also was happening in Lesotho around 2004, and so the reform committee came up with a lot of things that were supposed to be done, including coming up with a purpose-built parliament building that was going to support the kind of reforms that were being proposed. So that was part of the process. But as that was still being done, so there was I speak about it in the article, about this interministerial task force composed of actors from Parliament as the end user, the Minister of Finance, Minister of Public Works. When they were doing that, and they come up with a plan, then the Prime Minister, Pakarita Mosisili, went on a trip to China. And when he came back, the plans changed. Okay. This is when the Chinese government proposed that they would build a structure for Lesotho.
Right, okay. And what had they been using as a parliament building up to that point?
So up to that point, they were using an old building of, it's called the Batsani-Ncube National Council. It also goes back into the Lesotho history. So this was like a body, an advisory board that was set up by the British during the time of, Lesotho went as a protectorate. So this was a small kind of chamber built in 1909, then expanded a bit in 1957. So when 1966 independence, so there were now 2 houses of parliament. Remember, this was just for one body, the advisory body. Now there were 2 houses. The chiefs were now in a senate, and then the politicians, the directly elected members, were in the National Assembly. So it created accommodation challenges. And this building was in central Maseru. And now, because of accommodation challenges, because of the chiefs and also the politicians, they now needed, new kind of space to operate from.
So there's this part of the problem was that the space was not enough and that it didn't accommodate the new sort of expanded remit of Parliament, but also possibly part was having this colonial inheritance. Was that part of the issue? Was it desirable to have a proper, Parliament of independent Lesotho?
From what I got, it was an issue of more of getting a facility that works, because you'd be interested to know that even up to today, the Senate is not only occupying the old building in terms of the chamber that I was speaking about, the Basotho National Council building. They are also actually, as offices, they are using the residence of the resident commissioner, who then was, the British appointee. So the history and continuities of that colonial past still, is.
So it's quite difficult to get rid of that. Yes. Okay, I can see that. But so I can see then. It seems like quite a pressing case that Lesotho needed a new parliament. So then tell me a bit about why were the Chinese interested in building it for them?
When China got in, they sidelined the plans that were already in place, and these were very advanced plans. They were already prototypes, designs and all those things. So they sidelined those plans. They brought their own, plans. They brought their own architects. They brought their own construction company, Anjan, and constructed that building their way, and using materials that were not ordinarily available in Lesotho. But of course, as you mentioned before, Lesotho is an enclave of South Africa. So Lesotho usually uses South African standards. Yes. So they decided to use their own Chinese standards. And that created a dependence in terms of maintaining the building. So back to your question. So when I saw that, I then realized that the idea of constructing it that way was meant to, embed, China in the long term. So part of it is this long-term idea of, embedding themselves within the Lesotho domestic political institutions.
And is there a particular reason why they might be particularly interested in embedding themselves in a parliament?
So parliament in Lesotho, they are sort of like central institutions that actually facilitate political life. And so the dominant factions, the dominant political elites of that time are found in parliament. And these parliaments, they are now multi-party parliaments. So you invariably will find the future prime minister in parliament there. You'll find the current prime minister in parliament, because the Lesotho system uses the Westminster model of you choose the prime minister who commands the majority in the house. So it's like hedging political influence across within the current political elites, but across generations, in terms of, because if you look at the time when they constructed the building, they are working with a different regime, and 3 kind of governments have come, and the Chinese are still in control.
So what you've got is a situation where you're saying, as the Chinese government, you can see that the way the wind is blowing, that there will be changes of government in the future, and you're making sure that you know all the key players so that you'll have an easy transition. So in other words, it's almost like the Chinese are adapting their relationship around the understanding of how a democratic system with a change of government brought about by elections will actually come to pass.
Yes, that's actually what the essence that I got when I was looking at my material. But also, another point is that by picking to fund to construct parliament, because this is a very symbolic building, and almost like people see it. In fact, where they constructed it, it's on top of a hill called Mpilo Hill. You can actually see it as far as when you're in Bloemfontein.
In South Africa?
In South Africa, yes. So, it is a signifier of, Chinese influence of some sort. But also, it's not just like Chinese influence. It is a building that is useful because, as I explained, that there was a need for that building. So by picking, by picking this idea of constructing a parliament, they're actually fulfilling a need, a real need, but also embedding themselves. So it's more like when you look at it initially, it's more like a win for Lesotho, a win for China. But then you look closer, you'll see that maybe it's more like a win for China. The building is there. It is faulty. And the reason why the Chinese stick around is because the building is faulty.
Okay.
So maybe because it was supposed to be faulty anyway, so that they can stick around. So that's conjecture. But that's basically what I read.
Could you describe the building? Could you tell us what it looks like? Whether it looks like a building of Lesotho, or does it look like a Chinese building?
When you look at the building, you have to first of all understand, the building culture of Basotho. So one of the things is that because of weather elements, so there is extreme weather in Lesotho. Like you said, there is too cold or too hot. So they usually don't plaster their buildings. They use sandstone. So that's and most of the government buildings actually, they use sandstones. The building, that's the first part, is plastered. And you can see the cracks already, because when you look at the picture that I put in the article, when you look at the wall, you can see that it is being affected by the vagaries of weather. So that's point number one. But the second point is that the building is like the main building. It's like a square building. The public sector architect was telling me that it's like a building that was transplanted from somewhere and put into Lesotho. And this private sector, architect was telling me that, I should compare this with a cultural village that was built in Tababosiu, which is another, place, cultural center in Lesotho. That this building, when you look at it, there's nothing Basotho about it. But granted, it has a debate chamber, which has got the roof designed in a Lesotho hat. It's called a mokorotlo. So, and how that hat got there, it was not necessarily a Chinese invention. The government architects got that concession from the Chinese architects to include that, because they were saying, at least if we have that, then we can say, this is the element that, looks, as a building coming from Lesotho. Finally, the point in terms of how it organizes the space. There was a small chamber on the third floor of the building, which was meant for the Senate. And the chief said, no, we can't use this building. I put the picture again in the article. So it's a very small. Now it's being used as a committee room. So both in terms of how it looks from outside and also how it organizes the space, there are some of the challenges with the building.
Yeah. Thank you. It's a fascinating article. Congratulations on publishing it. And we're looking forward to the next one.
Thank you so much.